Interaction Design Day. This is very special because World Interaction Design Day is a global event. And given where we are located, by definition, we're the first ones to celebrate. So thank you for joining us. And so if you're not here for World Interaction Design Day, now's a good time to leave.
Grab another drink.
Take. I think I ordered too much red wine. I like red wine, so I think there's extra red wine. But yes, please do help yourself to drinks. So I'm going to start by playing it. No, I'm not going to. Please come up, please see ya. Thank you so much. Thank you. Is that going to play? Okay, I'm going to start by playing a video. And here's our first challenge for interaction design or any kind of design. There's music to this video. Except we can't play the music in here. So I want everybody to hum along your favorite song as this video plays, but this is just to kind of set the stage. What do I do now? Just pick?
Give that a shot. Yep.
Hum, come on. I can hear music. Yay! So weren't you impressed? How'd you like the music? Yeah, okay, so it was just meant to, kind of warm you up for the evening. But before we begin, first of all, I should have introduced myself. My name is Susan Wolfe. I'm one of the organizers of our local IxDA chapter, among other things. And what I'd like to do is start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which we meet tonight, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. And we pay our respects to the people, the cultures, and elders past, present, and emerging. And we also pay our respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here tonight. And so, armed with that, I just wanted to say a couple of words about what interaction design, World Interaction Design Day is all about. So it is the annual event that is organized by the Interaction Design Association. And it's an opportunity for us to come together and actually celebrate the important things that we do. But it's not just about sort of interaction design in kind of the mundane sense. It's really thinking about important issues and important topics that as designers we should be considering. And so our aim, as it says here, is to have a positive and long-lasting impact by facilitating activities that support dialogue and outcomes. And again, interaction design is super, super broad. And so our topic for the year, our theme for the year is actually ethics, equity, and responsibility. And so it's an important conversation that we have to have. World Interaction Design Day is celebrated around the globe. It's been going for a number of years now. We've been involved here in Sydney in running many events over the years. And you can see here just some of the ideas of the different themes. I took this off the IxDD website this morning to show at least the organization, the events that have registered with the website. And I'm sure there are many more that have actually that are actually going on as a result of this initiative. And as I said, it comes to us from the Interaction Design Association. And the IxDA is a global community, hence the map of the globe, and lots of different organizations around the globe, including ours here in Sydney, a very active chapter of which many of you come to us tonight from. And so just a little bit about IxDA. It's actually a very large organization globally, made up of over 150,000 practitioners. It's totally a volunteer group, which is pretty amazing given all of the things that we do. But again, it's all driven by the passion that we have for this industry. And so I encourage you to take a look at the IxDA website for lots more information. And that leads me to an event that many of you are sick of hearing me talk about. But I also wanted to, have to mention it. I can't not mention it. And that's that we will be running here in Sydney the annual international conference next year in February. Again, most of you have heard me say this. We have a number of our committee members here tonight. I'm one of the co-chairs along with Vera Chan, who's sitting over here. We have Ben, and Martin, and Kevin. Anyone else here from her? Oh, Damien, there you are, of course. Why aren't you sitting up here, Damien? There's a seat for you. Anyway, we are super, super excited about this because this is the first time this conference is, you've heard me say, this is the first time this conference is going to be held outside of North America or Europe. And so certainly it's the first time it's ever been in Asia Pacific. And we have a very exciting program that we're working on for you. If any of you are connected with me on LinkedIn, you would have seen a post I did the other day about a pie chart that shows just the diverse number of talks that we are now pouring through as we put together our program. So we're super, super excited, and we really encourage you to come along, plan to come along to this event next year. I just happen to have a QR code. Thank you, Ben. We just happen to have a QR code that we would encourage you to check out. So that's that, but it's not just about us, it's also about Sydney Design Thinking tonight. So I'm just going to run over to Ben.
Thank you. G'day, I'm Ben. There's a bunch of you already from Sydney Design Thinking here tonight, so there we go. There's always one of the organisers, along with me, Kate Slinton, Kylie, and Lucas as well. And so we do a whole bunch of collaborative ones with IxDA, and we do even other ones, which are the mega meetups with two other CCX and Enterprise UX as well. So we've got, from a SydDT point of view, we've got two more we've got one in a couple of weeks, and then one at South by Southwest for ticket holders, and then two in November, and then we'll close the year in December, on the 7th of December, with another mega meetup. So plenty of SydDTs coming up. Hit that QR code, that'll get you to our meetup page, and the next one, 12th of October, is highlights from the Good Design Awards this year. So Ben Crothers and Irma will do as a couple of the judges on the Good Design Awards. They'll do their highlights. So it's
and they're always great.
And there's always good.
Got into the details of what made it awesome. And there's also the Ig Nobel Award for worse. Which is my personal favourite.
There's definitely the behind the scenes look. So it will be the things that didn't necessarily win an award, but were sort of judges' favourites and some trends, and we treat it as a bit of a State of the Design Nation. It's become an annual tradition now. So hit that QR code and hope to see you again in a couple of weeks. Thank you.
Thank you. And then there's Wave. And first of all, I want to absolutely thank Wave for hosting us tonight. We wouldn't be here doing this if it weren't for them. So they provided this lovely venue for us, and we're also going to be lucky enough to hear from them in a few minutes. So it's all great stuff, and so I love when we bring groups together like that. So on to tonight's event. So for tonight's event, we actually have 3 speakers. We're going to start with Ben, who just met. And Ben is going to talk, give us a talk on regenerative design and innovation in happy communities. And so for those of you who have heard this talk at UX Australia, it's a reprise of that, but there's probably some little twists maybe.
Who knows?
Who knows? So that's up number 1. And then second, we're going to hear from Will talking about some work that he's done here at Wave. And the idea here is that we're going to talk about the importance of ethics and equity and responsibility in design. And we're going to be drawing upon the reflections of some work that he has done. But he's not actually doing that talk alone, because the third speaker in this event is you. And you're going to be very much involved in this conversation, so we're going to make this very much a collaborative kind of discussion, and we're going to be really interested to hear your takes on the topic. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the mic back to Ben, and I'm going to let him talk about happy communities. Let me get out of your way.
How was everyone? So thanks for coming out on a Tuesday night, because we normally do our meetups on a Thursday night. So we're kicking off early this week because it's World Interaction Design Day. And so I'm Ben. I'm a designer, coach, and a founder of Dynamic 4. We're a social enterprise and B Corp, and everything we do is focused on how do we help create conditions for people and communities to be happier, and also doing great things for our planets, while also being financially successful and looking after our well-being while we do it. So how do we bring all of those things together? And I'm going to get to talk about one of my favourite things, which is regenerative design and innovation, and being able to do that for happier communities. Like that. So I also just want to acknowledge that I'm lucky to live, work and play here on Gadigal country as well, and so I pay my respects to elders past, present and future also. So every day we're bombarded by all kinds of messages. The climate crisis, the cost of living crisis, modern slavery, deforestation, loss of species, water pollution. And all of these messages are really important because we need to actually know what's going on and we need to have that sense of urgency. But if they're the only things that we focus on, then that pretty quickly leads to compassion fatigue and burnout. And that makes us feel helpless, and then that leads to people disengaging. And being able to do the work and the things that we're talking about in terms of regeneration, we can't afford to have ourselves or other people disengaging. We actually really need to make sure that we are able to head forward in a positive way. So to be able to move forward in a healthy way, we need to actually have a really clear and compelling vision, and then we also need very specific ways to be able to then take action to help make that vision real. And so there's the questions I'm going to talk about. And the very first thing is, what is this compelling vision for the future? And you're all looking at me expectantly like I'm going to give you the answer. That's not going to happen. So I'm going to ask you some questions, because I'm keen to hear from your perspective. What's your vision? What's the future that you want to work towards? So take a moment, take a sip if you need, take a couple of deep breaths, and I've got some questions for you about the future that you want. So first of all, if you cast forward a bit and even think about now, what do you really care about? What's something that really gets you and something that you really deeply care about and connect with? If you think forward into the future a bit, how are you spending your time? What are you doing? Who are you doing it with? If you're going to make that thing you care about real. And if you imagine that all the other life on our planet is healthy and thriving, what's that look like? How's the air? If you breathe in the air of that future, what's the water taste like? What's the food like? And if you then imagine how you're spending your time, you're doing work that you really love, that energizes you, you get energy from it, you don't find it draining or fatiguing, you get energy from it, you find it meaningful, and it's not just you that's finding it meaningful, but it's also valued by the teams that you work with, your organisation, and society more broadly. If you're spending your time doing that, what are you doing? How are you spending your time? And what's the future that you want, not just for yourself, but for your community and the different communities that you're part of, for society more broadly? And then what would the economy need to look like to support that future? So hopefully, you've breathed that in, you've felt it somewhere in your body. Hopefully you can name where you felt it in your body. Make it real. Don't leave this as this abstract, hypothetical future. Make it real. Really feel it. Build that vision. You might just have a glimmer of it now, but I'm keen to hear you share a bit of it. So I'm keen to sort of, eavesdrop, but spend a moment, just turn to the person next to you, doesn't matter if you know them or not, and just share a couple of things about that future that you want to see, and what's different, and how it feels to be there. So I'll give you a couple of moments. This is the risk of never being able to get you back, but... Awesome. It was great to hear the energy and the positivity. Who was talking to someone I've never met before? Show of hands. Decent number. Awesome. So I hope you made a new friend, and you also got to share a bit about something that you're really passionate about and care about, and the future that you're keen to work towards. Anyone want to shout out anything that was specifically interesting?
Biodesign.
Biodesign. Like biophilia,
Yes.
sort of biomimicry. Awesome. Biophilic design, beautiful. Anyone else want to share?
Getting rid of plastics and really looking towards a more sustainable process.
Awesome. And because I know you're going to ask me a follow-up question, how does it feel when it happens? What's the so what if we've got less plastic? What's better about that for your life and other people you know, for society more broadly?
Well, this man should answer that.
Play, Kevin.
Tomorrow by design?
Design tomorrow.
Ah, damn. It's close.
Is that a book on you writing?
There might be a
Look,
book.
there might even be a slide soon. So, that second question of that vision, which everyone's got at least some version of that, and I encourage you to spend more time thinking about it and putting layers to it and making it real. And I'm not joking when I say, where in your body do you feel it? Like when you can really viscerally imagine something, it's not abstract, it's not theoretical, you can really feel it. And when it's that real, it's much easier to work towards it and be able to follow up. So it's really the question then, how do we get from where we are now to that aspiration to make it reality? How do we make that happen? Well, the good news is we keep doing human-centered design. So that's starting with what we already do. Most of us in the room already do human-centered design to one degree or another. I think that's really important. Where, as human-centered designers, we're really good at listening and being able to gather information, build empathy. That's something that we train all the time. We're also really good at understanding complexity and making sense of it. And naturally, by what we do, we work with people to help design and create better futures. Another thing that we tend to do a lot of is we work at least one context broader than the one we're focused on. And that's really important. Nothing's in a vacuum. So being able to think and work at least one context, if not more, wider than the thing that we're focused on. So we've got our beautiful double diamond, which I'm a huge fan of. We can debate that later. I'm also a huge fan of the three perspectives of what's desirable, viable, and feasible, and being able to bring those three perspectives together. We've got our journey maps and our blueprints. And over the sort of last few years, increasingly, systems mapping and looking at ecosystems and mapping that out and designing for systems level change has become more a part of our focus and what we do as well. And that all leads sort of to a movement, and Martin is very key to it, around life-centered design. So not just the humans in these systems, but our role as looking after all living things, so that all living things are thriving. So we've progressively designed for larger scales and more complexity as a practice. And we're evolving, and that's what we should be doing. And there's also a trend towards embedding more purpose and impact into our work as well. And that's where I find the theory of change is a really useful way to help go, what is this vision? And then how do we get to that aspiration and make it real? Because the theory of change is really about, when we've got clarity of purpose, all the other decisions are a lot easier. They help filter options and help us make better decisions. If we know why we're doing something, the purpose of it, then it's a lot easier to work out how we're going to do it and what needs to be done. So being really clear on that purpose. And that's where the theory of change, expressed as a logic model, is a really simple and powerful way of looking at this. So starting on the right, thinking about that vision. What's that vision that we're working towards? And not just that long-term vision and the impacts that are needed to get us there, but the outcomes, the shorter-term outcomes that are needed to then be able to get us towards that vision that we're after. And then if we look at the other end, the problem, why is that not today's reality? What is the real problem? What are the root causes to those problems? And who experiences that problem, or those problems? And what's the context that they experience them in? What do we know about the systemic causes and of that problem? And so as a very quick example, in a dynamic 4 context of my business, so the change that we're working towards is that organisations and leaders solve problems that matter and do that in more empathic and innovative ways. And then they measure their success not just in terms of profit or financial outcomes, but equally in terms of creating great outcomes for people on our planet. So measuring it and valuing things from that perspective. And that's just not so businesses do things a bit better. It's so that through that we help create conditions that people in communities have increasing quality of life, and they're happier and they live on a planet that's cleaner and healthier. So from a dynamic 4 perspective, everything I do is lining up against that vision. And then, why is that not today's reality? Well, business has done a lot of awesome stuff over the last 250 years. Life expectancy has more than doubled. Quality of life measures has significantly increased by most dimensions, but not for all. So a lot of the problems that we have are either worsened or created by the way businesses have operated, especially when they pollute and extract and exploit. So the way that has been operating while doing a bunch of good things has also created a lot of harm and damage. So to be able to bridge that as a bit of a design challenge that we focus on is how might we help leaders and organisations create great outcomes for people and planet while also being financially successful and looking after wellbeing, increasing wellbeing while doing it. So to transition from where we are today to that vision state, this is basically what we look at, which is that middle point of then what are the inputs we've got, what do we do with them, what are the activities, what do we actually create, what are the tangible products, outputs of our work that then build forward into those outcomes and impacts over time. And it's really where that green circle is. That's all about regenerative design and innovation. How do we do this stuff that regenerates? And so we all like a definition, but finding a definition for this stuff I was not able to do. So I synthesised one, and the way I describe it is regenerative design is an approach that actively works to restore and transform social, environmental and economic systems to enhance resilience and well-being so all people, places and life on our planet thrive. So that's what regen is all about. And I'm going to say regen because regenerative is a lot of syllables. So it's more than just reducing harm, it's actively looking to contribute to positive change. And I find this a really useful way and spectrum to be able to think about where regeneration sits. So on the far left, we've got where we're coming from, the ways and models that we've been working, which have really been degenerating and they're fragmented and they haven't actually been, they're actively doing damage, it's a short version of that. So we need to move away from that and we need to move further to the right. So even when we talk about green, that's a positive step, and as long, in my view at least, as long as we're moving towards the right, it's all part of a change journey that we need to be on. So moving to doing things greener and more sustainable, I'm definitely all for. But even if we just got to sustainable, where we're not adding additional harm, that's not enough. We're past the point where we can sustain how we actually consume. So we do need to keep pushing further to the right there. And that's taking a living systems approach, and it's about collaboration, and really creating conditions for all life to thrive. So when I'm talking regen, I'm talking that journey and getting closer to the right-hand side here, where we're designing as nature, because we are nature. So actually being part of and a key part of the ecosystems that we are in, not separate to, which is the way, the mindset that we've tended to be doing things. So in terms of why we can't just sustain, has everyone seen the Earth Overshoot Days? A few nods, a few shakes, so mixed. So it's an organisation and they calculate every year the dates in the year where we've used more of the Earth's resources than can be regenerated in that same year. It's a pretty confronting detail when you look at, for the whole planet, we've passed that date, 2nd of August. So we've already used significantly more this year than the Earth can regenerate in this same year of 2023. And in Australia we're much worse than that, because we passed that date 23rd of March. So if the whole world consumed like we do in Australia, then we would have used all of those resources that could be regenerated in the same year by March. So we need roughly 1.7 Earths to sustain our current consumption. So just sustaining what we're doing, not an option. We desperately need to rapidly transition to regenerative ways of doing business and living. And they are highly entwined. So what's good business actually mean now? Designing business models, products and services that actually do positive things and regenerate is increasingly becoming the expectation for customers, for talented people, for investors. These groups of people actually want businesses to be doing good things, especially if you bring a new product or service to market or a new business to market. The entrenched and the incumbents, they've got a lot more protection wrapped around them. But if you bring a new product or service almost in any context now to market, you need to be doing good stuff. And we've just got this awesome opportunity to actually be able to use design and business to help create a positive impact. I'm really hoping that everyone here, that's part of how you want to spend your time and what you want to contribute to. So triple bottom line is really then the name of that thing of not just looking at the financial, the economic bottom line, which is what most people are used to, that profit, but also valuing and measuring and holding up equal outcomes for people in our planet while we make money. And it's good economics anyway, because if we don't have people and a planet, there's no one to make or receive the money. So we need to bring these things in balance and value all of them. And to be able to do that, we really need adaptive leadership. Everything we're talking about is working in really complex systems, which means that we need action learning, we need to learn through doing, which is another thing as designers we tend to be very good at. And we can't do it alone, we need collective action. We need to do this work together. And action learning has a few principles, and I really love a bunch of them. But the very first one, especially as we start heading into this space where, for some at least, some of these might be new concepts or new ways of thinking. But from action learning, one of the key principles is learning starts with not knowing. And I find that really liberating, because we're not expected to know. We've got to learn. And when we learn, then we can do better. So learning starts with not knowing, so let's learn. And then another one is there's no experts in complex challenges. So we're definitely talking about complex challenges and complexity. There are no experts. It's all emergent practice. We need to find our way through it. We need to take a human-centered approach to that and look at the big ecosystems as part of that. And then the final principle that I really love from action learning is that the people who choose to take responsibility in a challenging situation, they're the ones that have the best opportunity of success. Just by turning up and choosing to play means you've got more chance of success than the other people who didn't turn up. So I'm hoping we're all going to turn up. And the good news is that while some of these terms and phrases and language might be new or newish or new in a different context, people have been working on it for a long time. So we're not starting anywhere near ground zero. And there's the different scales of play. So Paul Hawken edited the drawdown report, which is also, if you haven't seen that, definitely recommend it. And then his more recent book, Regeneration. And these pair really nicely as a couple of books to delve into, specifically around climate, but also the sort of societal aspects around that as well. And then there's Designing Regenerative Cultures by Daniel Wall, which again is looking at a very planetary scale, but also brings it down to a cultural level as well. We've got Donut Economics. I'm assuming a lot of people have seen this one. So it's kind of working at an economic model at both a global, national, and more detailed level as well. Carol Sanford. So the regenerative business. Carol Sanford's been in this space since the earliest days and is one of the leaders and pioneers in the regen space. And she's got a more recent book. She replied to one of my posts the other day on LinkedIn and said, you need to check out my new book, so also check out her new book. But in her newer work, she then starts digging into the how, what she talked about in the regenerative business. And then we have down into designers and what we do as designers and our mindset. And I'm going to talk abstractly about the second one there because Designing Tomorrow comes out when? Next month?
Online next month, but Australia not until next year.
Awesome. So Martin Tomich is the author, along with Steve Beatty. So hotly anticipated. So it's great to see this work coming out of Sydney as well. And also Life-Centered Design is an Aussie author as well. So that's how we use design in the context of regen and contributing to the types of things we're talking about. And then the other thing that I tend to put in the mix for everything is they tend to be mentioned a bit in these other books and contexts, but not to the detail that I find is really needed, which is the humans who are doing the work, the people who are doing the work. So everything starts with mindset. Carol Dweck's awesome book, Mindset. I'm sure plenty have seen that, and the legendary Flow. So plenty of work to sort of build on. And when I wrote my book a couple of years ago, Solve Problems That Matter, I was really looking at all of these types of influences and how do we bring them together in a sort of integrated way. Because everything I do is focus on how do we help accelerate this transition that we're talking about. And how do we take an integrative and transdisciplinary approach rather than splitting things out of this stuff's done over there and this other stuff's done over here. As designers, we're very used to working as horizontals. We have always spanned different disciplines within organisations, which is why we're normally the rebel, because we sort of cut across all of the different areas. And it's the same when we start looking at systems and regen as well. And we also have plenty of frameworks. So there's the wedding cake. So these two models were both done by the Stockholm Resilience Centre. Everyone's heard of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs. That's a pretty universal nod. Awesome, glad to hear it. What I really love though is a way of visualising it like this. So it looks at the biosphere, the society, and then the economy as three layers, and then shows how all 17 of the SDGs are fully interconnected and related. And in this context, that was talking specifically about food as a way of the steel thread that goes through all of them. And then, so that's at the planetary scale, and then the planetary boundaries definitely at the planetary scale of how are we currently using the Earth's resources and how we're doing there. So they've got an interesting model there. So that's at the planetary level. What is it, still a couple of months ago now, something I'm very stoked about. We had our first wellbeing budget in Australia. So looking beyond GDP and just straight economic measures in terms of what success looks like at an economic and societal level in Australia. So it's looking at what to look like for Australians and Australia to be healthy, secure, sustainable, cohesive and prosperous. So it's got those different dimensions rather than just the economic. And then in the bottom right, the circular economy. Again, been around forever. These principles are not new, but they're getting a lot more traction over the last few years. Circular economy, especially in the last 5 to 10 years, has built up a lot of momentum, which is awesome to see. And it's starting to come more into how products and services are actually designed. And then coming back to my much loved donut economics. So again, using Kate Rayworth uses the SDGs and other things in terms of the social foundation, so that inner ring, and then looks at our planetary boundaries as the outer ring. And to live in a regenerative way, we actually need to stay within those two dark green lines. And then there's different models to then be able to look at how we're performing at a planetary level, but following this sort of scales of design systems. The donut is then designed to be downscaled to smaller contexts. So Regen Sydney and Regen Melbourne have both mapped the donuts for our two cities. So Regen Sydney, lots of awesome work. Is anyone from Regen Sydney in the room? No? Check out Regen Sydney's website, get involved. There's lots of activities, workshops and ways to participate. And a lot of this is pulled together by the Donut Economics Action Lab deal, which is worth looking at as a global community that sort of brings all this together. So the reason I'm showing you these things, hopefully not too much framework or model overload, but it's really just to show that we're not starting ground zero and that all of these things work at different scales and levels. So we've got the planetary down to the smaller detail. And for all the old school UX designers in the room, highly controversial in a lot of cases, but Jesse James Garrett's 5 elements of UX, which has been around for a long time, 2000 I think, yep. And it's an illustrated version that was done in 2007, but looking at the different layers when we're designing user experiences, and we've been used to designing at these different scales. I'm not going to dive into the controversies, but at a similar time in 2007, there was a systems design version of basically the same thing. Obviously different elements, but that same concept of we've got the things above the surface, those different events and trends and patterns, and then we've got all the things below the surface. And by accident, a bunch of them line up with kind of our theme for Interaction 24, because our theme is revisit, reframe, regenerate. And on here we have react, which is where we don't want to do too much of, it's above the waterline, reframe, redesign, and regenerate. So those scales of design, it's a familiar concept, and the concept at the heart of all of this is really whole-ons, that every whole is made up of other wholes and is part of other wholes. And by wholes, all of those times I said it there was with a W. So complete parts. Every complete part is made up of other complete parts. So it's not about doing away with the design practices that have come before, but really how do we evolve, see the bigger picture, design for the bigger picture, and we already do it. And as whole-ons are created, we include and transcend the things that have come before it. That's the concept of whole-ons. So we're not getting rid of UX, UI design. How do we do that in the context of the bigger things at play and design for that consciously? And that's really what this, which is from Daniel Wall's book, Designing Regenerative Cultures. On the far left there, product design, service design, we've got those smaller nested parts, which is where a lot of us would spend our time. And then we start heading out into, built environment, community design, industrial ecology, urban planning, bioregional planning, planetary scale type level stuff. But they're all connected and they all rely on each other. So that was a lot of arm waving from me and pointing at frameworks. Trying to bring it down to that reality now of how to actually design for regeneration in my own life and my own design practice. So how to make it real. And the very first thing is I want you to be happy. Everyone looks stunned. And the reason I want you to be happy, I like you of course, but it's also when we're happy we're way better. We're just way better at anything that we want to do. So we've been conditioned to sort of think about, if I just achieve this one thing, then I'll be happy. And then we shift the goalposts. If I just achieve another thing, then I'll be happy. So Sean Aker talks about individually and collectively, we keep pushing the happiness goalposts over the cognitive horizon. So we're never going to get there if we put happiness as a condition of being successful. And from all the happiness research that they've done, they actually found it's the opposite relationship. That when we're happy, which means not just a fleeting mood of joy, but when we're in a positive state, we're smarter and basically better at anything we do. And so happiness is actually at the centre, and success revolves around that. And we're not talking just a few percentage better. It was at least 30% better in all the range of sort of professions and vocations that they did this research in. So if you can do one thing that will help regenerate you and your life and your design practice, it's actually taking action to build these happiness habits. So Sean Aker also talks about happiness as a work ethic, something that we actively need to do to create our happiness. There's a really great resource I find called Greater Good in Action, which is part of Berkeley University. I can give you the URL later if you want, but they've got over 90 different happiness habits sort of techniques for free on their website with a simple how-to, and so lots of things you can experiment with, see what sort of practices you enjoy, they add to your life, those you'll keep doing. If they're not working, you'll drop it, you can try something else. But really working on the happiness habits is a key part of regen. And that's really where the inner development goals came from. So most in the room had heard about the SDGs, which are really important, the world's to-do list. But it's been recognised that unless we actually do the inner work, we've got no chance of being able to achieve the SDGs. So the IDG has been emerging over the last couple of years, made up of these 5 dimensions and 23 skills and qualities. So it's still pretty emergent, but I recommend checking it out. And some things I really love is the openness and learning mindset, critical thinking, humility and empathy, and then that far right side of acting, which is all about we need courage, we need our creativity, we need optimism, and we need to be able to persevere. We need to be able to keep going, which means looking after our own well-being and doing regen on ourselves. Otherwise, we'll give up. And that's why I really encourage people to have their own personal well-being plan. So all the people I do coaching work with, I encourage to have a well-being plan, actively looking at what helps you keep feeling in a happy and healthy way. And ideally things that you already do and have done through your life. When you start doing work that you're really passionate about, it's really easy for these other interests to fade away and get crowded out. And doing regen work or any impact work becomes all-consuming, and then we lose balance of perspective, and ultimately we can't sustain it. So it's really important that we have a clear well-being plan with a backup plan. So at some point, it's not an if, it's a when, you're going to have some rough times. So what are you going to do in those times? What are some lead indicators of being able to identify that you're heading and trending in an unhealthy direction for you? And what are you going to do about who you're going to talk with? And how will you know when you're back into a positive space? So happiness, having a well-being plan, critical to regen, because that's where everything starts. It all starts with mindset. And so at Dynamic 4 back in 2010, I listed out and created 4 design principles which I designed to be able to guide everything that Dynamic 4 is about and design, sort of guide all of the strategic decisions, but all the way down into operational and even design decisions. And I want them to be simple. So in the regen space, there's lots of frameworks, as you've seen, and I've only shown you a tiny number of them. Most of them are kind of in the built environments, urban planning, a bit in permaculture, but in the so the principles that go with them tend to be lengthy. So most sort of had 7 to 15 sort of principles, which in terms of being able to apply in a daily way, for me I find too much. So I want to keep it really simple and principles that work in any context, not just in the built environment or just in the digital, but things that transcend everything. And so I'm going to very quickly run through this because I'll share the slides and you can reflect on these more. But just some questions for each of these, which if you're thinking about your own design practice, then being able to think about how they might apply and what they look like in the context that you're designing. So people first, all about designing with and for people to deliver great experiences. Lots of things here which I'm sure we're all very familiar with. And the key one that I like to highlight is whose voice is missing from the conversation. What are we actively going to do about helping invite that voice in? It's not enough just to sit back and say, I made it available to everyone. Those who didn't turn up, didn't turn up. We're actually serious about people first and representation. We need to go and invite them and help create conditions that are more inviting than things that they've probably experienced in the past. Also looking at the strengths and assets of the people and communities that we're working with. So something that I please don't do is, please don't apply deficit thinking. Please never see people as problems to solve or problems to fix. It's really harmful, and it doesn't actually get to the root cause of what's happening and why there's a problem in the first place. We need to look at the systems at play, not seeing people as broken. Next one, positive impact. Really around that purpose. What's your own personal purpose? What is your own value system? Ikigai, I always get that one wrong, is, I find, a really useful little framework to help that reflection. And when you've got clarity on your own personal values, that helps, and you can drive things forward. You can make better decisions that are aligned with what you're about. But it's also really important to look at the value systems of the organisations and people you're working with as well. Are they aligned? If they're not aligned, you're probably going to be pretty fatigued a lot of the time. And sometimes that might mean getting out of that situation, switching up. Or, if you can, I encourage you to think of it as a design challenge, and how might we help those other people actually have more purpose embedded into the work and treat it as a way to grow together as opposed to separating. And again, we have to look after our own well-being while we do that. So if we can embed more purpose and impact in our work, then, especially aligned with our personal values, things go a lot better. Perspective and context, how do we actually look after our own well-being while we're doing this work? What's the full life cycle? Some of these things we've been talking about. What are the ecosystems involved? How do we look at this whole set of things and keep that perspective and context? Dynamic and adaptable. Everything we do, we're working in complex, dynamic, adaptive systems. Nothing static. So we can't just keep doing the same thing every day and expect the same results, because things are changing. So even if we're getting good results, we're going to have to adapt, because the last few years haven't taught us anything. Things can change very quickly. And it also showed how quickly we can adapt. When we actually want to, or need to, then we are highly adaptable. So ideally we get a little bit more notice than we had for 2020, which, with a pandemic, knowing exactly when it's going to hit, that's hard. But being able to look at the macro trends and sort of see what things are in play, how do we anticipate things changing, how will we respond to that, is a key part of being dynamic and adaptable. Because if we can give ourselves more response time, we can be a lot more adaptable.
I think Bill Gates predicted the pandemic, didn't he?
Who?
Bill Gates.
I think you might be reading weird stuff. Everyone's predicted a pandemic.
Was saying that he was putting microchips in everyone.
So lots of people have predicted the pandemic, and there's been plenty of preparation, but knowing the exact timing and conditions and spread, that caught effectively everyone off guard, at least at scale. And so we then think about what comes next. We've talked about that big vision that we want to see. Some stuff about how do we make those aspirations and turn them into reality. And now, what happens next? I've just laid out a whole bunch of things which are very much threads to pull on, and some taste to a few things. Hopefully there's some things in there that are interesting. If you hit that QR code, it goes to a blog post which has my slides and actually a recording of when I did this talk at UX Australia, and also has the long form written version of this with links to all the resources and stuff. So if this talk wasn't long enough for you, you can have the 5,000 word version with hyperlinks. The other thing that's really important in terms of what next is, as we were talking about before, we can't do it alone. We need to find our community and really stick with and build our communities. And in the impact space, I've already mentioned Regeneration Sydney, so they're another one in the mix, but Social Enterprise, Council for New South Wales and ACT, Social Enterprise Australia, the B Corp community, SydDT, IxDA, Catalyst 2030 is a global collective of social entrepreneurs and innovators who collaborate for the goals, so I'm a proud member of them as well. And then people like SME Climate, which is specifically for small business, and there's another one which I can point you to, which is basically some climate tracking and collaboration around that side of things. So not just technical detail, but communities built up around these things to share lessons and be able to help each other out, and there is a lot of collaboration. And you've already had your IxD 24, but here's another reminder. So revisit, reframe, regenerate. They're the three themes that we're going to be exploring in detail 25th of Feb to the 1st of March next year. So come and join us, we'll have fun. So regen is definitely a team sport, and so we need our community around us while we do this work. And in terms of what next, well, hopefully you'll share your vision. I loved hearing the bubble of sharing some stuff, even if it was just making a new friend and you didn't get to your vision. Share your vision, share what you're really excited and passionate about, because that really makes a difference. When you focus on that positive, when we focus on that future that we want to work towards, that helps us get there, especially if we can make it real. So I hope you'll share it, and I look forward to hearing yours soon. And being able to get really clear on that bigger picture and the why that we're designing for. And that then drives what we design and how we design. Because our worldview does shape our design, and our design then shapes us back. So we want to design well for this very circle and the ontology of it all. I really hope that we're all going to embed purpose and positive impact in the work that we do and all the business and design decisions that we make, and for them to get us closer to that future that we desire. So overall, I'm hoping that we'll collaborate to solve problems that matter, and problems that matter for our teams, our customers, and life on our planet. And we can do that with our regen and having all of our business models and our products and services to be regenerative. They also need to be financially successful, and then we need to look after well-being and increase it while we do it. And most importantly, we need to have fun while we're solving problems that matter. And that's me.
We're running a little bit of an activity now, so you'll have lots of opportunity to continue talking and having a glass of wine or beer, as well as coming up with some thoughts around the topics of ethics, equity, what is it? Ethics, equity, and responsibility. It's a bit of a tongue twister. So, yeah, I'm Sarah. I work with the team at Wave, some of whom are here tonight. Wave, people from Wave. Yes. We've got Will, Moned, and Maddie up the back there from Wave, who are going to be helping us with this activity. So Wave is a human-centered design and innovation consultancy with offices in Sydney and Melbourne. So we're super excited to be talking tonight and running this activity on the topics of ethics, equity and responsibility in design. And we're going to be drawing on Will's reflections in care settings. So we've chosen care settings as the stimulus for our conversations around ethics, equity and responsibility, because those issues of ethics, equity and responsibility are much more acute in care settings. So Will's going to share some fabulous insights and experience with us. So just to give you a bit of an idea about the topics, we're going to tighten the timings up a little bit on this because we're running a little bit over. So we'll just be having some reflections, and then a breakout, reflections, and then a breakout, reflections, and a breakout. So it's, just ignore those timings on there. We'll just have shorter activities. So I'd like to introduce Will.
Cool.
Will is a resident care expert at Wave, and we're looking forward to hearing and sharing. Thank
Right,
you.
well, I'm very glad the microphone has run out of battery because I do have some notes and I didn't know how I was going to hold and turn pages and things like that. But can everybody, am I talking at a, what, Ben at the back? Carrying probably not as well as your whistle, but you can hear me up there? Up a little. Okay, I'll just yell a little more. Okay, so as Sarah said, we're just going to do a little flip between me doing a bit of talking and then us as a group doing a bit of talking and a bit of sharing about how these topics or issues may or may not come up in your work and your practice. And I would also just like to start by acknowledging country. I have to be in Gadigal land today, flew up from Lituata, Tasmania, so I just want to acknowledge Palawa and Eora nations as ongoing custodians. And yeah, so look, the bulk of my experience, I'm going to do this louder thing now, I'll look for you for volume up if I can. The bulk of my experience is in health and care settings. That's just where I landed in started my design career by chance and by luck, a mixture of those things. But it's, you know, it's the sector I'm really drawn to working in now. And I'm also, it's made me realise that I'm also really passionate about, is the microphone back? Okay, this is going to throw up the thing, but I'll figure that out. I'm also, it made me realise, working in care settings made me realise how passionate I am about the topic of care. And that I'm really, you know, interested in design because I'm interested in designing care and designing the conditions for care to exist. So that in a healthcare setting, like that might look like people, an interaction between a healthcare practitioner and a patient, and making sure that that's you know, caring, the element of care and not just health is within that healthcare interaction. But also outside of care spaces, being passionate about care in terms of collaboration, so the ways that individuals within organisations come together and care for each other, and thinking about you know, non-care settings, non-special care settings, where that also comes up. So for example, recently I did a project working on a remote work strategy for a government agency for teams in regional areas. And so in that context was really thinking about, really wanted to think about, you know, the ways in which an organisation might care for the smaller details of employees' lives that become really, you know, kind of elevated when you bring work into the home life and all this sort of great. That kind of situation demands more care in that sense anyway. So when I think about equity, ethics and responsibility, I'll put it in the right order, I'm thinking about the connection there being, for me, one of care. It's about designers caring about the outcomes they create, and it's also about designers caring about how they create those outcomes. So that's really the link for me. It's about care. If I boil these three words down, it's really about care for me. And whether or not it's like that for you, I think designers are people who care. I think we give a shit. I think you care because you're out here on a Tuesday night and you should be at home. So yeah, I think care is something central. And so I'm going to kind of examine these experiences through that lens tonight. Okay, so the first bit we're going to talk about is responsible empathy. And I just want to say, you know, like I'm going to share some things, but I'm really excited about learning your perspectives from them as we do the breakout groups as well. It's not an expert talk in that sense. We're going to do the expertise together, as Ben said. So responsible empathy. The first is about overplaying the empathy card. You know, empathy is really important in human-centered design. It's how we've sold ourselves into the corporate sphere. And, you know, there's lots of smart problem-solving approaches out there, but designers are the ones who do it with empathy. You know, that's our kind of differentiator. And that's a smart business play for designers because, you know, senior executives continue to show how little empathy they have for their customers and their users. And, you know, like we joke about that and laugh about it with what people say, but, you know, it's been kind of played out in really forensic detail in the Robert's inquiry, I think, because in that setting, you know, as much empathy as I can conjure up as a designer, I really have a hard time empathising with people who are making those decisions because they feel so disconnected from any kind of sense of ethics, equity, responsibility, care. You know, like, were there humans rolling this thing out, making decisions about doing this and how it was played out? So yeah, you know, there's a need for empathy, and that's a good thing, and it's a positive that we have it. But it's just thinking about. I just want us to think about kind of how we may rely on empathy in different situations, maybe leaning too heavily sometimes. So last year, I co-led with my colleague India a project into disordered eating in the community health space. So disordered eating is just kind of on the less severe kind of presentations of what we commonly think of as eating disorders. So if healthy relationship with body and food is at this end, the more kind of severe disorders we hear about in the media, etc., we may have personal experience, family experience with, are up here. Disordered eating is kind of in the middle where it's compulsive exercise, for example, or dieting, things like that. So difficult behaviours. And we're working with a community health agency to kind of reposition their response to these things. And we completed, to do that, we went out and we tried to develop empathy with people who experience things like this. And we completed a range of interviews with people who had, in our discovery phase, and we thought really carefully about safety. Like, we wanted to do this in a safe way. We knew we were going to be talking to people about challenging situations, and we wanted to do that and be really careful. And so we put a lot of thought into that. We screened with clinician input, so we knew some kind of risk factors of who people might be that we come across. Yeah, good. That's good feedback. And we tried to embed a lot of choice in that process for people. So where we held those interviews, whether it was online, whether it's in person, trying to gain, make consent explicit at multiple stages, and working with people to attain their level of comfort in the process. We started with using conversation with imagery and got people to choose images, and in that way kind of let them choose images that relate to their experience and let them kind of decide how deep they were going to go, how quickly. Just really being clear that, there's a principle that there is nothing, for me, that there is nothing worth learning in an interview or a research project that is worth harming an individual who told us that. So really thinking carefully about that. And I think we did a good job. We heard from multiple research participants that it had been a really positive experience and they really kind of enjoyed or felt kind of held in that way. And the insights landed really well with the client. We moved into the design phase, and we're really able to kind of shift the thinking from a very kind of clinical view of presentation and symptoms to what more of a whole kind of personal response might look like to involve clinical and non-clinical elements and kind of as a much more kind of inclusive kind of platform. But after that project, I heard about some other similar projects in sensitive settings that didn't go so well, and that there were disclosures in those interviews, other projects that we were hearing about. People share things in those interviews that neither the participant or the practitioners were kind of ready or set up to hear. And so it made me think about, whether we were doing enough. And I think we were. I think we were really playing that kind of the role of thinking through safety. But I think we also, kind of as designers generally, I think we also kind of rely on empathy and rely on luck a little bit to get us through. And so, I think the point I want to emphasise is the kind of good intentions aren't enough. If you read Cave and Will Farrier sticky notes, you get that message that empathy is enough, good intentions aren't enough. We need to do better than that. If we want to do this kind of work, especially in sensitive settings, we have to really build our skills of hearing and holding those stories, and then also partner with disciplines that have that expertise. So you really build those skills that sit outside traditionally what designers do. And it's also okay for us as designers to say, this is my limit, and I'm not kind of, okay to go on here. We can be aware of that. So, importantly, I think it's not only sensitive topics, and we put the quotes around the sensitive topics that carry this risk. Like harm, the ability for us to do harm is out there at any stage. And if you think about, a conversation about a savings account is like millimetres away from becoming a conversation about financial abuse. And a usability test on a dating app could easily segue into something that's around social exclusion and anxiety. So I think we really have to be aware that we're delving into some, but empathy allows us to get into some really deep places with people, and that's the skill that allows us to get in. But we've got to be aware that we need other skills to kind of support us once we're in that place. And that's thinking about empathy. So I'll hand over to Sarah now, and then we'll break out.
Great, thank you, Will. So now we're going to break out into groups. So get ready to move around. So probably groups of 4 to 6, just where you are. And we're going to have a conversation with each other around what this means for us and our practice. So, care has given us, and Will's reflections have given us some great thought starters and stimulus. So let's now talk about, what this might mean for us all. So we've got a couple of discussion points there. One is, what are some situations where empathy may not be enough, and there is risk of causing harm to research participants or researcher. So, any experiences that you may have had or heard of relevant to that. And then how might we reduce the risk of harm in our practice? So, on your feet, you can grab a drink if you need to as well, or want to. There's plenty of space, so just jump into groups of 4 and 5. We'll chat for 5 minutes or so, and then come back.
Have enough respect for their time to do a little bit of research. What can you know about that person or the set of circumstances or the ecosystem in which you're operating in? To not walk into an interview situation blind, but be able to ask intelligent questions. Be authentic and present while you're there with that person to understand that you have a relationship with them while you're in a room and you're talking. You're not just a blank screen on the end of on the other side of the table, the other side of the Zoom call. You're actually there to hear that person. You're really there to be authentic and establish an actual relationship with them. And then also, I guess, respect again at the end to be able to make sure that you round out that experience by actually either acting on the insights that you gather from that human being, or be able to feedback to that person and say hey, look, you've created a situation for us where we've learned more and we've benefited from your experience, so thank you. So really just about communicating that and then making that, that information available to the person that you're maybe gathering insights from. I think is sort of where we land.
Yeah, great. So about going in really informed and making sure you can make back to them the value that they are having in this process. Yes?
We talked about the fact that it's okay to have failed interview or observation, and often you feel it yourself. And I've got a couple of situations where people feel uncomfortable, like a young designer in a petrol forecourt trying to do observations and intersects on people filling up their car in a rough part of town, feeling really uncomfortable to interrupt someone. And he pulled the cord and said, I just can't do this, I need a friend, I need someone. So the ally, it didn't have to be another designer, just someone else to be there with them. Not because he saw fear, but he just felt that. So listening to your own body and thinking, it's okay to say, can I take a break? And then coming back later, because often whatever the situation was cools off, and then you can choose to continue on, because we can't be so execution focused when it comes to people. It's sometimes okay to call it a day on someone and move on to the next subject participant.
Yeah, so just about calling it when it's not.
When it gets that point.
Yeah, and that raises a topic that some of us have talked about. Sometimes it's should you actually be doing this research, or is it actually the right thing to be doing? Is there another way? to get that information, without having to raise difficult issues for people. Did you have a thought?
Yeah, we talked around similar topics, everything from, like I did some research with, as part of a project on disability, homelessness, and we talked about also other areas of disability, including supporting autistic families, and similar to what you were talking about, like how do we both support the participants but also support the researchers and thinking about often the language that we use. Like we use an example of disability, like where the difference between using the word normal versus difficult can mean a big difference to the participants that you're talking to. And the same with the homelessness, with domestic violence. Language matters, both in the way that we communicate, but also how do we synthesize those insights. But you're talking about with Wave, how they brought in psychologists to support the researchers and to understand both how they communicate and also how they process that information.
Yeah, so language matters. Okay. Yeah.
Can I do a very quick shout out for our good friend Marish Shakir, his Design Feeling podcast, which is very much on this topic of the desire behind design as people and thinking about what we need in terms of looking after our well-being, especially when we're doing kind of research which might have an impact on us as well as the design researchers. So if you haven't checked it out, Design Feeling podcast, Marish, long-time IxDA Sydney friend, now based in London, check him out.
Anyone have any burning things they want to share, or will we move on to hear some more reflections from Will? Over to you, Will.
Good day. All right, and thank you. Like I said, it's about me putting some thoughts out there, but sitting in a couple of the groups, like absolutely hearing that there's a lot of thought about what's happening, which is great, and also hearing some of your responses, and some kind of thinking for myself, and I said, wait. So look, we'll combine these next two ones, and then go for a bigger share at the end. This second one is about rethinking vulnerability. So, I told you this was going to happen in the microphone. Again, because we care, we're designers, we care about outcomes, and we're interested in change. We often want to work with people who are kind of at the more pointy end of things. I think if you put an advert out there for design in mental health, for example, or other design with other populations who are vulnerable, you often see a queue of designers down the street. I'll probably be in here. Because we want to work with, all kinds of actors. We feel like that's where we can have the most impact. We're also aware of kind of systems that, that are failing people, and that's part of the reason we're contributing to design. Vulnerability itself, we talked a little bit in the previous discussions, Ben's talk in the previous discussion about framing, you mentioned kind of language use and how important that is. Vulnerability itself is an interesting concept, so it's really prevalent in a kind of community health context, where we have at-risk people and we have specific kind of measures to reach out to them. And that was really prevalent in COVID because all of a sudden we were hearing about vulnerable at-risk groups every day. So we're hearing about, that we had to be aware of our own health, that of others. And if we weren't wearing a mask for ourselves, we were wearing it for a vulnerable population like elderly people in conditions, for example. So in organisational settings, vulnerable is really thought about this kind of high-touch, additional, version of a service or an offering that's meant to service more people that need more engagement, more touch points, more taking along that journey, for instance. They're specialised versions of the kind of normal pathways that most of us kind of can function with. And it's often, reactive. When vulnerability appears, that's when you kind of activate this other pathway. That's when you kind of, alarm bells go off and you engage people in a different way. You give them But the thing is that relying on solely on this approach is, rather than addressing the problems with those mainstream offerings, is that it fails to account for the fact that those mainstream services and products actually create vulnerability. So I'm on a project right now with an essential service provider working on a strategy for vulnerable customers. And essential services are called that for a reason. They're essential to maintain a job, to care for children, to be in housing, to be a functional member of society. And providers in the essential services space kind of usually have two avenues to look after people. You have hardship pathways or payment plans, etc., and then you have the kind of threat of disconnection with people that are using them. And they're kind of avenues. But rarely looking at the mainstream product itself and how that accounts for the complexity that's built into that, how that creates vulnerability. So, I mean, I wonder if anyone here can talk honestly about their energy bill and understanding it in detail. Your water bill, your gas bill, your internet bill, off-peak tariffs, kilowatt hours, things like this. We don't really need to, most of us, I'm generalising here, we don't really need to because we have the capacity built into our lives. We have time, money, energy, access to support networks. So that if I get hit by a direct debit payment fee because I didn't have money in that particular account in a day, I might just absorb it, because I can financially absorb it perhaps, or I might have time to get on the phone with someone for 30 minutes and argue that it's unfair. And so I have this kind of capacity to deal with complexity that's placed upon me. But perhaps I can dip into savings because they're there in the first place. Perhaps I can dip into family support because it's there in the first place. So others don't, and that's how vulnerability is kind of created. The point here is that we're starting to think about vulnerability as something that's created rather than something that's inherent in people. And then, maybe key point before, that we don't want to think of this deficit-based approach, we want to think about people being vulnerable. We want to think about the systems that create difficulties for those people because they're not inclusive. So, it may start as a characteristic or a risk factor, like being a carer for an adult child, or being a woman who's been out of the workforce for a long time raising children and has got a super balance. And then that might be compounded by a circumstance like a divorce or a job loss, something that changes income. And then it's just this really kind of idea of cascading effects. So, it's a missed bill here, falling behind on rent, and then credit card bills that are debt is insurmountable. So, I guess the idea here is that we're not, it's not just these vulnerable populations. We might be working with vulnerable populations explicitly, or we may not be. But again, the idea is that regardless of where we're working, we're all involved in these systems and interactions that have the capacity to be complex, to be exclusive, not inclusive, and to compound those kind of risk factors on circumstances and create vulnerability. So we'll talk about that in a second. We'll go back to that one. And then the last one is around designing good jobs. So, in care settings and other services that are delivered by people to people, so I do like relational services, we're really focused on designing interactions and experiences, and at the same time we're also designing the jobs that need to exist to make those experiences happen. So again, one of the reasons I love working in these kind of services is about creating these kind of conditions, these moments of care for these two strangers to come together and do a thing that they otherwise wouldn't have, and if that can be done in a kind of caring way, that's great. That's transactional, that's great. And that might be, a nurse who is willing to let me lie down when I get a blood test because I don't really, I admit that I might faint otherwise because I'm not pretty fast the red stuff. So it's that kind of care of that being, of me exposing that vulnerability and someone seeing it and accepting it and making it okay. And it might also be the care that again, might be given on a call with a call centre agent. Maybe I'm talking about that direct debit fee that I've been punished with and advocating for myself. I'm really frustrated because of the unfairness that's being built in that system, and I get a sense of someone who validates, at least and hears that frustration. So it's like unfair and then sort of says those things really important. But that kind of frontline work that involves such heavy lifting of care is really, especially in health, aged care, disability, etc., is unpaid. It's overrepresented by women. It's got this really high admin burden, and it's got this really high capacity for burnout. So when I started working in aged care, I would constantly hear, I was driven by seeing elderly people let down by a system that failed to meet their needs. And I was really inspired by all these stories that I've heard about care workers, who were the ones who bridged the gap between what the system said they could do and what the need and desire that was out there, and made it happen. And I thought I wanted to replicate more and more of these stories of great care workers who went above and beyond. It was a really inspiring thing. And I also hear from management that these people are driven by care. It's what they do. Care is so amazing, and they're really here. They care. You see these kind of anecdotes all the time. And I came to see that that's true, but also that that's something which is taken advantage of in those settings. Because when I did research with care workers, I'd see the careless design that went into creating their jobs. Awful processes, disconnected systems that people had to kind of tie together, this high admin burden, constant logging of the minutiae of activity to kind of tick the boxes of government funding. All these hoops you have to jump through to do that work. And you wouldn't do it if you weren't driven by care. That's the thing that gets you right. And the humbling thing was for me is when I read a personal care manual. So a personal care manual is a work procedure essentially for helping people, helping people bathe, wash, go to the toilet, strangers, very intimate settings, very difficult, delicate work, and not something that I could do. So it was a very humbling experience, and I started, whenever someone new joined the organisation, that would be my first point of call. Go and read the personal care manual and get real about what this organisation asks of people and how much what they ask for them over their lives. We do think about employee experience. I'm not saying that we ignore that, but I think that often employee experience is secondary to customer experience, and it's in less detail that we think it through. And my point, I guess, is that yes, we can design good enough work experiences to make this great customer experience happen, but a lot of good enough employee experiences add up to shit jobs, really terrible jobs. So I think we need to underplay the central role of customer centricity and balance that out with this kind of idea of designing good jobs which supports those good care outcomes. So that's some thoughts about designing good jobs. So now we're going to flip to a breakout discussion on those two related things.
Yes, we are.
It's a very effective way to speed up, if you're running behind in the talk, is to just have a pigeon pattering over your head.
I thought it might have been rat or mouse.
Yeah, well, that's true. Pigeon would be a good option.
Pigeon. Okay, so we're sort of bundling up this chat on those two topics. So we're going to do what we just did a moment ago, really reflect on some of the meaningful points that Will has raised around rethinking vulnerability and designing good jobs. So got some thoughts on topics there for your conversations. So, when have you observed systems that actually create vulnerability? To what extent should we take responsibility for actually calling out organisations for creating responsibility? I think creating vulnerability. I think we see this happen all the time, in
in many industries. Financial services is one that comes to mind. And designing good jobs. So, what do you think are some of the reasons that care for frontline workers actually gets neglected? And what are some examples that you might have seen of, really challenging frontline jobs that, you could never do and that shouldn't be as difficult as they are? So, breakout time. On your feet. Feel free to grab a drink.
Different groups or same groups, okay?
Yeah, look, same groups is fine. It's probably easier. Yeah, up to you. If you didn't like the group you had before, you can shift. So, the language of risk is a great idea. Anyone else? The last one before we go on.
All right, everyone.
Yeah, go for
We didn't really get to discuss it much because I was distracted. I'm sorry. But when I'm thinking about accountability and designing good jobs, one thing that came up to mind is the gig economy. How that came out of a design of a service for product from opportunities, but actually ended up creating vulnerabilities to the people who are really needed and actually quite vulnerable in the end because there's no, they have no cover, there's no one looking after them, I guess, right? In this sort of gig economy. And that's kind of brings me to the next one. So what is that designing a good jobs mean? Like if we creating new services and designing jobs, new jobs for like what does that look like? What does that mean, I suppose? I'm sorry, I'm getting more questions than answers, but that's what the thoughts that goes through my mind in terms of findability and designing good jobs. So I think it is quite prevalent. Like I definitely would be able to do those jobs. People who chasing, breaking the law, putting themselves in danger just to get delivery McDonald's. That's just really, to me, like how lazy can you get? Going down the road and pick up a McDonald's. That's sort of playing my mind anyway.
It's a really great example that I haven't considered about in a non-care space.
Yeah.
About the overwhelming focus on customer experience and convenience, creating a whole, not only a job, but a whole sector in terms of the gig economy that is just secondary.
And become vulnerable because
the vulnerability.
The growth mindset that ends up, the flip side is vulnerability in jobs and insecurity in
like what cost?
wages.
At what cost?
Yeah, that's really interesting.
It's almost like the opportunist ideal, which has come up, through the whole idea of someone coming up with the next big idea, right? Startup mentality, not aligned with the reality of the end user. So, what kind of these guys have been talking about is that there's a real disconnect between someone saying, oh, wouldn't it be great if we could have everybody as a car become a taxi driver, but not having the infrastructure, the knowledge and the heritage of taxi drivers that have been driving for 50, 60, 70, 80 years. Knowing the knowledge of getting around town and all the sort of that side of it, overnight you go, oh, I'm going to become an Uber driver, so therefore I'm as good as a taxi driver. And not having any of the sort of legacy and knowledge, given to them.
Yeah, it's really interesting. We had these pegged as two different topics, but they actually overlap quite a lot. Yeah. So, this gig economy and creation of jobs
I think
is creating.
Yeah, just one other question to add to the pile is, because it probably wouldn't be a design meetup if you didn't mention AI. So, you know, if you like, we're talking about designing good jobs, but at the same time, some of us are involved in designing out good jobs. You know, so if you think of the Uber driver situation, it won't be a problem potentially. In some Silicon Valley person's mind, it won't be an issue in 20 years because they won't exist and we'll just have cars driving. And so we're not just talking about designing good care jobs, because those care jobs could be first on the chopping block. So, you know, what's our role and responsibility in maintaining good jobs at the expense of automation?
Sorry. This is a poorly thought out thought.
What?
But
So almost.
But like, there's also like that other element, and this is sort of between both, right? Because like the healthcare and like the Uber driver, because there's something about respect, right? So when you think about healthcare workers, we generally think about them with a lot of respect, right? There's a lot of sacrifice, there's a lot of hard work, they're caring for us. And yes, how many of you guys actually tip your Uber delivery driver? How many people of you actually instead get irritated when they go the wrong way or something? I literally saw on Oxford Street just the other week an Uber Eats delivery person get hit by a car. The front of his motorbike was taken off, he was okay. But literally also heard people be like, stupid freaking delivery driver. Right? And where does that come from? Because we can also design that as well. It's not just the business system or the service, it's also like the attitude that even the customers have to the people who are working. So we have a weird thing, I think, with healthcare, in that we've managed to glorify and praise healthcare workers who are providing the service, but somehow with Uber we've managed to denigrate and really hate on the people who are delivering your McDonald's or your Thai food, because let's pretend like there's not one of those every 700 meters. Like,
and that's not new. Like, you know, there's the Uber drivers that are copying it. I mean, low-paid workers are often looked upon as second-class citizens. Look at the contact centre people that get abused all the time. You know, all of these things. So interesting food for thought. We've got a wrap now. We could keep going.
Ethics.
I'm sure it's a big topics.
Do you want to share the resources before we?
Yeah. I think what we're going to do now is we'll just speak the takeaways well. So keen on those. We've also got some resources here. Susan, we might, we might set them.
So a couple of things here, if you don't get them, I'll make sure these are shared on the Wave LinkedIn account. So it's another place you might find some links here. But yeah, just some thinkers that have informed this thinking, this talk, and some other things to kind of dig into next week.
Thanks, Will. Susan, over to you.
Well, I was going to...
Thank you.
Okay, well, I was going to wrap things up by kind of summing up everything that we heard, but I think I'm going to start with the beginning and go to the end. And the first was clarity of purpose. I think that's one big takeaway. Clarity of purpose. And I think we can just sum up the rest of the conversation by saying Uber. And I think that really sums up everything that we talked about, all of the issues, pros and cons and vulnerability, and the jobs, and having empathy and all of those things. So, before I thank you for coming, I want to make sure we give a big shout out to our volunteers this evening. It's been great having you, and thanks for coming along and participating so actively, and thank you for sticking around. And we look forward to seeing you at upcoming events. We've got something, we have City Design Thinking. We're hopefully having another IxDA event in November that you might be interested in, but we also want to see you at the conference. Okay, I'm done. Goodbye.